I exposed his ultimate lie at their lavish party, and walked away into a life I deserved. The scent of betrayal and a message in the night. Ilara closed the jewelry box, the soft click echoing like a final judgment in the quiet room. She looked at her reflection in the polished wood, at the woman with the calm, composed face of a seasoned attorney. A face that betrayed nothing of the cold stone that had just settled in her stomach. "All right, Julian," she whispered to the empty room, "let's see how this play unfolds." And so, the observation began. The earring was the first piece of evidence, a tangible anomaly in their curated life. Now, her senses were heightened, and the other signs, once easily dismissed, became glaringly obvious. It started with his schedule. The late nights, once a rarity, became a weekly ritual. "Strategy meetings," he'd say, waving a dismissive hand. "Product launch is a beast." Then came the scent. It clung to the collar of his shirt, a fragrance entirely alien to their shared life. Not his familiar, comforting blend of sandalwood and leather, but something cloying and sweet, with a sharp, aggressive note of gardenia. It was the scent of someone younger, someone trying too hard. The scent of the other woman. One evening, he came home reeking of it. He smiled as he tossed his jacket onto a chair. "Just trying something new," he'd said, a little too brightly. "Don't you like it?" I didn't answer. I just walked to the kitchen and drank a glass of water, the cold liquid doing nothing to quench the fire of questions I wasn't ready to ask. Patience, however, has a statute of limitations. The definitive proof arrived a week later, not with a bang, but with a quiet, digital chime. I was sitting in my car after a grueling day in court, the city lights beginning to blur through the rain-streaked windshield. My phone buzzed. A message from my old law school friend, Chloe. Her text was brutally efficient, just one single sentence that sliced through the last of my denial. "Ilara, I know I shouldn't, but I just saw Julian at the Celeste Lounge with a blonde. They are sitting very close. Are you okay?" I read it once. Then again. My heart didn't race. Tears didn't come. What I felt was a profound, terrifying hollowness, a silent implosion in my chest where 10 years of trust had just been vaporized. It was the cold confirmation I hadn't known I was desperately seeking. The world outside my car went silent. All I could hear was a low ringing in my ears. I typed back a reply, my fingers steady. "Thank you." I was more okay before reading that, I guess. That night, after he was sound asleep, snoring softly beside me in a bed that suddenly felt like a crime scene, I slipped out and opened his laptop. My work as a litigator had taught me one thing: never go into a confrontation without all the facts. With the cool, detached precision of a professional gathering intelligence, I navigated through his digital life. And there she was. Serafina Reed. The name appeared everywhere, a toxic weed strangling the garden of his calendar and emails. Meeting invites after hours, project files shared with a familiarity that was far too personal. An entire digital ghost life running parallel to ours. Serafina Reed. I knew that name. A face swam up from my memory, from last year's holiday party. A new marketing associate, barely out of her 20s, with a smile that was all teeth and ambition. She'd complimented my dress with a voice that was as sweet and sharp as the perfume on Julian's collar. Looking back, I realized I had smiled back at her. The same polite, detached smile I give a witness on the stand right before I dismantle their testimony. I wasn't a woman who made assumptions. But I was also not a woman who ignored her gut when it was screaming. My instincts were now a deafening siren. So, I formed a plan. 3 days later, on a Wednesday, Julian told me he had a late meeting with the out-of-state office. An excuse I now knew was a lie. At 7 p.m., I walked into the Celeste Lounge. It was dark, intimate, filled with the low murmur of secrets being shared over expensive cocktails. I chose a small table in a discreet corner, a vantage point from which I could observe without being seen. I ordered a glass of white wine and waited. And then they walked in. Julian and Serafina. I had prepared myself for this moment, but the physical sight of them together still felt like a punch to the throat. He placed his hand on the small of her back, guiding her to a table. His hand. The same hand that held mine at our wedding. He pulled out her chair, leaned in, and whispered something that made her laugh, a high, tinkling sound that grated on my soul. He smiled at her with an unguarded warmth I hadn't seen directed at me in years. It was a smile from our beginning, now being used to mark my end. This was no misunderstanding. This was a calculated betrayal, blatant and cold. I watched them for 10 minutes, my wine untouched, the ice in my veins spreading. I saw enough. I left before they even ordered, slipping out into the night unnoticed. She sat in the car, the engine a low hum in the dark garage, watching the security light on the house blink. Rage was a storm, chaotic and loud. This was something else. This was ice. You chose this, Julian, she whispered to the empty seat beside her. Now, I just need you to say it to my face. The opportunity for the confrontation came 2 days later. I didn't stage it. I simply waited. He came out of the shower, towel drying his hair, a false sense of normalcy hanging in the air between us. I was sitting on the edge of our bed, the comforter we'd picked out together feeling like a prop on a set. My voice, when I spoke, was as calm and steady as if I were addressing a jury. I was at the Celeste Lounge on Wednesday, Julian. The towel slipped from his hand, landing with a soft thud on the hardwood floor. His eyes, for less than a second, were wide with pure panic before he expertly shuttered them. He turned away, walking towards the dresser, buying time. Oh? Look, Ilara, I think you're misunderstanding something. It was a work thing, a client. Was holding her hand a work thing? I asked, my tone dangerously quiet, was whispering in her ear part of the quarterly review. I stood up. Her name is Serafina Reed. The mention of her name made him freeze. He spun around, his face a mask of frustration and feigned injury. All right, look, you're blowing this way out of proportion. Things between us, you know they've been distant lately. Distant. The word was a whip crack in the silent room. Since when, Julian? Since I started working 70-hour weeks at the firm, so you could have the capital for your real estate ventures. Or was it just since you started deleting meetings from your Outlook calendar and scrubbing your call history? Tell me. He deflated. The fight went out of him, replaced by the sullen resentment of a man who'd been caught. All right. You want honesty? Fine. We've been seeing each other. But I didn't plan it. It just happened. I looked him straight in the eye, the last vestiges of the woman who loved him dissolving. Affairs don't just happen, Julian. You didn't trip and accidentally fall into her bed. You made a choice. Over and over and over again. He had no answer. And in his silence, I heard the end of our marriage. I packed his things that weekend. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I felt nothing but a hollowed-out resolve. I thought that was the worst of it. The bottom. But I was wrong. There was a level of hell I hadn't yet discovered. 6 weeks later, he was back, standing on my porch in the pouring rain, looking like a drowned dog. He wasn't there with an apology. He was there with a bomb. We need to talk, he said, his voice laced with a performative anguish that made my skin crawl. We've already talked, Julian. There's nothing left to say. Ilara, please. He swallowed hard, his eyes wide and pleading, casting himself as the tragic hero of his own pathetic story. I messed up. I know that. But Serafina, she's pregnant. He delivered the line with a perfectly timed pause. 11 weeks. It's mine. I heard the rain drumming on the roof, felt my own heartbeat thumping a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs, but my face remained perfectly still. No rage, no sorrow. Just a strange, bottomless quiet, as if I were watching him from a great distance. A new life, built on the foundation of an old lie. What do you want from me, Julian? I asked. I just thought you deserved to know. I closed the door in his face. The divorce proceedings began. We met at his lawyer's office, a sterile room with grey walls that felt appropriate. I was all business, armed with financial statements and asset lists. I wanted this over with clinical efficiency. And then she walked in with Julian. Serafina Reed, in the flesh. She wore a tight knit dress that accentuated the slight, but definite, swell of her belly. Her hand rested on it possessively, a constant reminder of her victory. She was a vision of smug, triumphant maternity. But something was off. Throughout the meeting, she barely looked at Julian. Her attention was glued to her phone, which she kept placing face down on the polished table every time it buzzed. At one point, she excused herself for an urgent call and was gone for nearly 10 minutes. It wasn't just nerves. It was a deeper secret, a hidden current of anxiety running beneath her confident facade. A few days later, I was at a notary's office downtown, signing yet another document severing a piece of my life from his. As I was leaving, I almost bumped into a familiar face. Leo Forrester. Julian's best friend from college. The best man at our wedding. He was the only one from Julian's circle who'd even bothered to check in on me. He saw me and froze, his expression a jumble of pity and something else, something that looked a lot like guilt. He gave a weak smile, and I nodded, ready to walk past and spare us both the awkwardness. But then he called out my name, his voice low and urgent. Ilara, wait. He glanced around the sterile office, as if to make sure no one was listening, then looked back at me, his eyes full of conflict. Please. If you have a moment, there's something you need to know about Serafina. He led me to a quiet coffee shop 2 blocks away, the kind with small, secluded booths that were perfect for hushed confessions. The air smelled of burnt coffee and anxiety. My anxiety. And his. Leo Forrester, Julian's best man, the man who had given a heartfelt, laughing speech at our wedding about loyalty and lifelong friendship, couldn't meet my eyes. He ordered 2 espressos that neither of us would touch. What is it, Leo? I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. I was past emotions. I was in the evidence-gathering phase now. He finally looked up, his eyes a swirling mix of guilt and pity. It's about Serafina, he began, his hands trembling slightly as he stirred his untouched coffee. It's more complicated than you think. It started before she ever met Julian. I froze, my hand tightening around my cup. We met at a marketing conference a few months before she joined his company, he said, the words tumbling out in a rush of shame. It was intense. A whirlwind. For about 3 months, and then, she just vanished. Ghosted me completely. No calls, no texts, nothing. I thought I'd imagined the whole thing. The next thing I knew, I saw a photo of her on Julian's arm on LinkedIn, and he was calling me, ecstatic, telling me he'd met the one. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture far uglier than I had imagined. This wasn't a simple affair. This was a pattern. He called a few weeks after that, Leo continued, his voice barely a whisper. To tell me she was pregnant. My blood ran cold. Leo, I said, leaning forward. Do you think the baby could be yours? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the photo gallery. She sent me things, he said, his voice cracking. Even after she was with Julian. Kept me on the hook, I guess. I didn't know what to do. He slid the phone across the table. It was an ultrasound photo. A grainy, black and white sonar image of a life yet to begin. But it was the caption underneath, a message from Serafina to Leo, that felt like a shard of glass twisting in my gut. Look closely at the forehead. Totally yours, don't you think? Winking face. Let's just hope it skips the stubbornness. I couldn't breathe. I stared at the casual, damning words, the winking emoji a symbol of her breathtaking cruelty. The truth about Serafina was worse than I could have fathomed. There's more, Leo said grimly. He swiped through a series of late-night texts. Messages from her that were vague and manipulative. I'm not sure things are going in the right direction. If it all blows up, do you think we'd be okay? And then one from just a few nights ago that made me feel physically ill. Do you want to feel the first kick? It's strong, like you. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a calculated, premeditated fraud. She wasn't building a new life, she was executing a hostile takeover, and Julian, and his stability, his wealth, was the target. In that moment, sitting across from the other man she had deceived, an unspoken, grim understanding passed between us. This was an alliance born from betrayal. My lawyer's mind took over, the shock replaced by cold, hard strategy. I need everything, Leo, I said, my voice firm. Every text, every photo, every hotel receipt you have. We are going to build a case. 2 days later, I arranged to meet Julian. Not at our home, but at a sterile, anonymous coffee shop downtown. He arrived looking tired, probably expecting a tearful conversation about our assets. He was not prepared for what I had in store. I didn't say a word. I simply opened my bag and placed a thick manila folder on the table between us. The folder of evidence. This is the truth you never bothered to ask for, Julian, I said calmly. He opened it. He flipped through the pages silently, printed copies of the texts, the hotel bills from a trip Serafina had supposedly taken for work, and of course, the centerpiece. The ultrasound photo with her sickeningly sweet note to Leo. I watched his face. The confusion, the slow dawning horror, the way his knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the table. The confident man I married evaporated before my eyes, replaced by a hollow-eyed stranger. He finally looked up, his face ashen. What are you going to do with this? I took a slow sip of my coffee. There's a party this Friday. A celebration for new beginnings, I believe the invitation said. At the Grand Crestview Hotel. I let the name hang in the air between us, a ghost of a happier time. You remember it, don't you? The place we were supposed to have our 5-year anniversary dinner. He visibly flinched, the memory a fresh wound. Do the right thing, Julian, I said, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. It was the ultimatum. Tell everyone the truth yourself. Because if you don't, Leo and I will be there. And we will do it for you. In front of everyone. I stood up, leaving him there with the ruins of the life he had chosen. The choice is yours. On the night of the party, the ballroom at the Grand Crestview Hotel was glowing with a fraudulent warmth. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden light over tables draped in white linen, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive flowers and the sound of forced laughter. It was a celebration of lies, and I had arrived to give the gift of truth. I wore a simple, square-necked black dress, the same one I'd worn for my first major court victory. My statement dress. I wore it when I needed to feel invincible. Leo met me at the entrance, his expression steady, though I could see the nervous tension in his jaw. He didn't have to wait for my cue. We had a silent agreement. We walked in together. The moment we stepped through the grand archway, a wave of silence washed over the room. It was palpable. Laughter died mid-sentence. Wine glasses froze halfway to lips. 100 conversations stopped, and 100 pairs of eyes turned to us, a current of shock and curiosity rippling from table to table. The public confrontation had begun before we'd even spoken a word. At the front of the room, near a small podium, stood Julian and Serafina. He had just finished a toast, his glass still raised. She was clinging to his arm, her baby bump a prominent symbol of their supposed future. Her triumphant smile was plastered on her face until she saw me. Then, it faltered, cracking at the edges. We walked directly toward them, the sound of my heels clicking on the polished marble floor the only noise in the cavernous room. I stopped a few feet away. Leo stood beside me, a silent, resolute partner. "Serafina," I said, my voice carrying easily in the stillness. "Thank you for the invitation. I'm here to congratulate you both." I paused, letting the statement hang in the air before delivering the payload. "But I also brought a gift. Something I think Julian should open before anyone else raises a glass." Serafina's smile became brittle, a fragile piece of glass about to shatter. "Ilara. This is a private party," she said, her voice tight. "If you have something to say, perhaps this isn't the time." "I thought so too," I replied, looking directly at her, then letting my gaze shift to Julian. "Until I realized your private actions have very public consequences. And the man standing next to you deserves to know about them." Julian's face paled. Leo stepped forward slightly. "Amelia, we need to talk. And Julian needs to hear this, too." I placed the manila folder on a nearby table and opened it, not for the guests, but for him. "Julian," I began, my voice clear and methodical, "these documents, these messages, these recordings, they all point to one very inconvenient truth. The baby Serafina is carrying might not be yours." A collective gasp went through the room. Serafina let out a sharp, theatrical laugh. "What is this? Classic jealousy. Are you really this desperate, Ilara? And you," she sneered at Leo, trying to play the victim again. Leo just shook his head slowly, his voice calm and sad. "This isn't a story I made up, Serafina. You're the one who sent me the ultrasound with the note about the baby having my forehead. You're the one who messaged me at midnight, questioning if Julian was really the father." "That's not true," she snapped, her composure finally breaking. "That was a joke. You're twisting everything." I held up my phone. "Were you ever invited to an ultrasound appointment, Julian?" He slowly shook his head. "Because she told you the doctor didn't allow guests, right?" He nodded, his eyes wide with confusion. I turned up the speaker on my phone, holding it close to the microphone on the podium. And then, her voice filled the room. The voice recording. Soft, polished, and utterly damning. "Julian doesn't suspect anything. He believes it all. I haven't even let him touch my stomach at the appointments. Things are going smoother than I thought." The room held its breath. The silence was absolute. Serafina stared at the phone as if it were a snake. "That's fake," she gasped. "That's not my voice. This is a setup." Julian finally turned to her, his own voice broken. "I gave up my wife for this. For you. Because you told me this was an honest new beginning." "It is," she cried, her voice cracking with panic. "Jared," I panicked. "I didn't know what to do, but I love you, I really do." Leo spoke softly, but his words landed like hammer blows. "You said the same thing to me. Same words, same tone. That was it. The final push." Serafina whipped her head around to face Leo, her face contorted with pure venom. You were nothing, she shrieked, forgetting her audience. You were just the backup plan in case this didn't work out. I chose Julian. And there it was. The truth, finally spoken aloud, not by me, but by the liar herself. Her world collapsed in that moment. A wave of understanding and second-hand embarrassment moved through the guests. People began to leave, not wanting to be witnesses to the carnage. An older couple slipped out first. Then a group of colleagues from the back, murmuring polite, false excuses. Serafina stopped resisting. The fight drained out of her, replaced by utter defeat. She grabbed her purse from the table, and, without another word, walked briskly out of the ballroom, her head down. Julian stayed frozen, his eyes following her until she was gone. His world had collapsed. Then, he turned to me, his eyes red not with anger, but with the hollow shock of a man whose entire life had just been revealed as a lie. "Thank you," he rasped, the words catching in his throat. "For not letting me live in that illusion." I gave a slight, formal nod, the aftermath just beginning to settle around us. "I didn't do this for you," I said, my voice even, cutting through his gratitude. "I did it for the truth. And for a child who deserves to grow up without being trapped in a lie." In the quiet aftermath, with the last of the curious guests having slipped away, Julian's composure finally shattered completely. He took a staggering step towards me, his face a mask of desperation. "Ilara, please," he began, his voice breaking. "Don't let this be the end. I was wrong. About everything. About you, about her. About that whole insane mirage of a new beginning I was chasing. I was a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. But if you just give me one chance, I can fix this. We can fix this." I took a deep breath, the air in the empty ballroom feeling clean for the first time all night. "Not everything needs fixing, Julian," I said softly. "Some things just need letting go." "I can't let you go," he said quickly, the words raw with panic. 10 years, Ilara. We were a team. You know me better than anyone." A sad, final smile touched my lips. "No, Julian. You don't know who I am anymore. The woman you left 6 months ago isn't standing here right now. That woman is gone. The woman who is here survived. She learned how to breathe on her own again. And she finally realized her worth was never dependent on how you, or anyone else, saw her." I paused, letting the finality of the words sink in. "I'm not saying this to punish you. I'm saying it because it's the truth. I've moved on." "Moved on?" He looked up, his face hollowed out by shock. "You mean, someone else?" I thought of Ethan Hayes, of the easy laughter and quiet respect we shared. A man I'd reconnected with at a legal conference 3 months ago. A man who had known me in college, and saw me for who I was now, not who he wanted me to be. I gave a single, firm nod. That was the moment he truly broke. It was the one piece of evidence he couldn't argue against. The truth that my life was no longer waiting for his to restart. Leo stepped forward from the corner of the room, his silence finally breaking. He looked at Julian, not with triumph, but with a weary resolve. "I'll take responsibility, Julian," he said, his voice firm. "If the baby is mine, I'll be her father. No courts, no fighting. I'll be there for her." Julian just nodded, a man with no fight left, forced to accept a truth he had run from for too long. The weeks that followed were a quiet unraveling. I heard through a former colleague that Serafina had left the city, returning to her hometown to have her baby in obscurity. True to his word, Leo booked a flight for the week of her due date. He couldn't be with the mother, but he wouldn't abandon his child. He signed the birth certificate for a little girl named Aurora. He chose what was right, not what was easy. Julian requested a transfer to a branch of his company in another state. The day he moved, he sent me a short, final email. I'm trying to become a better man. Not to win you back, but because I owe it to myself. I read it, and for the first time, felt a flicker of hope for the man I once loved. I didn't respond. Some things are best left in the past. My life now looks nothing like it did before. There is a new beginning, but it is quiet and it is mine. The frantic pace is gone. I eat breakfast slowly. I read books that have nothing to do with case law. I'm with Ethan, and it's a love that doesn't blind, it illuminates. It's not about filling a void. It's about walking alongside someone who already sees you as whole. People sometimes ask if I would go back, if I regret the years I spent loving a man who would betray me so completely. The answer is always no. I don't regret the love or the trust, because without the collapse, I wouldn't have found the strength to rebuild. This was never a revenge story. It was a rescue mission. I didn't stand up in that ballroom to make them hurt. I did it because freedom in truth is the only freedom that matters. Last month, while clearing out some old boxes, my fingers brushed against something small and hard. The diamond earring. The tiny, glittering catalyst for this entire storm. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight, which was next to nothing. It was just a thing. A symbol of a lie that no longer had any power over me. I walked outside, to the corner of my street, and dropped it into the charity donation bin. A final, quiet act of letting go. As it fell from my hand, I felt the last anchor to my old life finally drift away. I was free.